Just in case you're new to the series, we do post all of the final recordings to the Conservancy's website, and we'll send it out tomorrow in an email, along with any resources that are shared this evening. But welcome, everyone. My name's Megan Quirk Herrera. I'm serving as the Interim Executive Director of Rock Creek Conservancy. For anyone new to this series and who isn't familiar with the Conservancy, we're the philanthropic and stewardship partner to the entirety of Rock Creek Park, and our mission is to restore Rock Creek and its parklands as a natural oasis for all people to appreciate and protect. Each year, we engage around 5,000 volunteers who help care for the park's natural, cultural, and historic resources. As part of our partnership with Rock Creek Park, we collaborate on the Race, History, and Rock Creek series. So this program, for anyone not familiar, ensures that all the stories of Rock Creek are heard and recognized. And in recent years, we've explored diverse narratives within the park, such as African American history at Rock Creek Park, mobilizing memories at Meridian Hill Park, and the William Beckett Project. And these events have really deepened our understanding of the park's multifaceted history and strengthened our awareness of these lesser known stories. Tonight, you're in for a special installment focused on women's history, and we're thrilled to have you with us. Looks like this is being transcribed. I'm just going to hit OK. Thank you all for being here and for making our work at the Conservancy possible. We're particularly grateful to our three speakers and our moderator for the evening for sharing their time and this important history with us. I also want to thank the Conservancy team members, Elena Nyan and Wynn Lee, on the Conservancy team who helped plan and organize this program. And we'd love to thank the Rock Creek Park team members. They always share their wealth of knowledge and resources, and they work really hard to ensure that the full story of Rock Creek Park is shared with our community, especially stories that we don't often hear. I want to especially thank Kim Elder, who just recently retired from the National Park Service, so couldn't be with us tonight. We want to thank Kim for her 37 years of commitment and service to the National Capital Region with NPS. Her contributions have been innumerable over the years, so we'll have to do a future program on her specifically and her impact on the park, including her tenure with the Civil War Defenses of Washington. But Kim also helped organize tonight's program, so we're very grateful to her. Before we begin, a few quick housekeeping notes. Please keep yourself muted during the program, just to minimize background noise, but we will have time for questions at the end, so please feel free to drop those into the chat as we go. And I'd like to introduce our moderator for the evening, Autumn Cook. Autumn is the Public Affairs Officer for Rock Creek Park. Autumn has been in this role since August 2023 and advises on parks communication, both internal and external, serves as the park's digital lead for websites and social media, and leads planning efforts for the park's special events. Autumn began her career with the National Park Service in 2004 at Harper's Ferry National Historic Park, focusing on education, interpretation, and communications. And she worked in public affairs at two other federal agencies before returning to NPS at Rock Creek Park. Autumn will facilitate tonight's program and looks forward to a great discussion, collectively sharing and learning more about women leaders in Rock Creek Park. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Autumn, to introduce the program and our incredible speakers.
Thanks, Megan. I'm going to introduce each person, so if we can have the next slide. Angela Kramer is with us tonight as Executive Director of the Friends of Peirce Mill. Angela partners with Rock Creek Park to preserve and interpret the last working grist mill in Washington, D.C. With a background in museum education, Angela develops a wide range of free public programs at the mill, culminating with the Mid-Atlantic Grain Fair in October. The Friends also work closely with NPS to maintain and operate the mill's wooden machinery and are currently developing a plan to help fund a full-time miller at Peirce Mill. Next slide, please. Also with us tonight is Rebecca Henson. Rebecca Henson is the founder and executive director of Springsong Museum. a Maryland master naturalist, and mom to 2 nature-loving boys. Ms. Henson most recently worked at Nature Forward's Woodend Sanctuary. She serves as vice president of the Board of Neighbors of the Northwest Branch. Ms. Henson has degrees in history from Vanderbilt University and politics, policy, and society focused on comparative environmental policy from the University of Bath. And our final panelist tonight is Miss Georgia Ellard. Georgia Ellard made history as the first female superintendent of Rock Creek Park. After joining the NPS in 1955, she steadily rose through the ranks, breaking barriers as the first Black woman in many of her positions. She became assistant superintendent of Rock Creek Park in 1981, acting superintendent in 1983, and later that year, its first female superintendent. Her leadership earned her multiple achievement awards and the Department of the Interior's I can't say this word. There we go. Meritorious Service Award in 1988, the year she retired after more than 3 decades of service. We're going to start our discussion tonight with Angela.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Autumn and Megan, for the introductions. My name is Angela Kramer, and I'm the Executive Director of the Friends of Peirce Mill, and I'm here to tell everyone a little bit about the Peirce Mill Tea House. I want to thank the Conservancy and Rock Creek Park for organizing these events. I've been happy to be part of a couple of these, and today we're going to focus on one of my favorite topics, which is the Peirce Mill Tea House. So we can move on to the next slide here. So a lot of you may know Peirce Mill is a working grist mill, and when it was built in 1829, that was what the building was. And the mill served as a working grist mill until 1897. I should briefly define what a grist mill is. For those of you who don't know, we grind corn, turn it into cornmeal using water power. And we did that until 1897, when the main shaft broke and the machinery was no longer functional. We can go on to the next slide now. So by the late 19th century, the mill was no longer working, and the mill had also become part of Rock Creek Park in 1892. So the building was now part of a park. It was on the outskirts of the growing city. Washington, D.C. was no longer primarily farmland. When the mill was active, people would bring their grain to the mill. Well, now it was a growing city with neighborhoods and people who wanted to find an escape from the city and from what was then considered modern life in 1905. I guess we wouldn't consider it modern life today, but back then people wanted an escape from modern life. You see the cars here that people took up to the old mill to enjoy a day in the country without leaving Washington, D.C. Around 1905, park managers decided to add an amenity to the park, and that was a tea house. And so around 1905, a woman named Mary Louise Noble became the first of many women to operate the Peirce Mill Tea House as a concession, meaning that these women paid rent to Rock Creek Park for the privilege of managing the tea house, and then would keep the proceeds from the sale of whatever food and beverages they provided. We can go on to the next slide now. So this is a photograph from 1924 in front of the Peirce Mill Tea House. But I'm very fond of this photograph because I think it says something about the tea house movement. And you may not be aware that the tea house movement was a movement. In the early 20th century, establishments called either tea houses or tea rooms were enormously popular. And they were places, first of all, it was a business that a woman could own and operate at a time when there weren't that many opportunities for female entrepreneurs. So it was an important, employment opportunity for women. Tea houses also provided places where women could gather. A lot of places where you might meet in public wouldn't be appropriate for places for women to go, places like bars. A tea house is a place where women could gather, they could meet, they could also talk about things like the right to vote. And so tea houses are closely associated with the women's social movements of the early 20th century. The other reason I wanted to show this particular photo is because it it reveals something about one of the main questions that people often ask me about the Peirce Mill tea house, and that is, was the tea house segregated? We do know that restaurants in DC, while not segregated by law, were segregated in practice. And so the assumption is that the Peirce Mill Tea House was also segregated. The women in this particular photograph, this image is part of a series, like I mentioned, that was taken in 1924. These women posed all over Rock Creek Park. It was part of a photo shoot. And so they're sort of exemplifying the sort of fashionable young woman who might patronize a place like the Peirce Mill Tea House. But we do know, like I said, that we believe that the tea house itself, the clientele of the tea house, was segregated. But in 1919, the tea house received a letter. The Rock Creek Park managers, thank you for advancing the slide there. Rock Creek Park managers received a letter from a woman named Hattie Sewall, who was interested in running the tea house. And this was in 1919 when Rock Creek Park needed to find someone new to run the tea house. The tea house was being managed by a woman named Florence Blake. She was one, like I said, in a series of women who ran the tea house. And she didn't have the best reputation. She wasn't paying her rent on time, and park managers were looking for someone new to run the tea house. And so word got out that they were looking, and quite a few people actually wrote Rock Creek Park asking about the tea house. And I went and looked at the files because all these files are still are in the National Archives, and I found letters from all kinds of people interested in running the tea house at Peirce Mill, including this letter from a woman named Hattie Sewall, who happened to be an African-American woman who wrote to Rock Creek Park. You can see here in November of 1919, and this is a photograph of the letter that she wrote. She'd recently moved to DC from Arizona, and she had lots of experience as a restaurateur. She had experience managing restaurants, and she was interested in the tea house. She'd just moved to DC. So there was a bidding process. Like I said, there were lots of people interested, but only 3 people submitted bids. Hattie Sewall ended up having the winning bid and began renting the tea house in the summer of 1920. And here on the left, you see an advertisement that we found that she placed for her new tea house down by the Old Mill Stream in Rock Creek Park. And she placed this in July of 1920. But even before this ad appeared in the newspaper, Rock Creek Park had received a letter from a neighbor who lived just up the hill from Peirce Mill. His name was E.S. Newman, and he was a relative of the Peirce family. And he lived in a mansion called Cloverdale, which is still there. It's just up the hill on Tilden Street from Peirce Mill. And you can see from this letter that can we just go back for a second? Sorry. You can see from this letter that he did not like the fact that a Black woman was running the tea house, and he complained about that even before she opened the tea house. He continued to complain. He had all kinds of complaints about Hattie Sewall, including arguments over the telephone and all kinds of things. But despite E.S. Newman's complaints, we have other reports that Hattie Sewall did an excellent job running the tea house. Park managers remarked that she increased business at the tea house. She paid the rent on time. She appears to have been an excellent manager of the tea house. But nevertheless, in the following fall, in 1921, when the tea house concession came up again, park managers declined to renew Hattie Sewall's concession to run the tea house. And it's quite clear that the reasons were because of her race. Now, park managers had to find someone new to run the tea house, but Hattie Sewall, because of the Hattie Sewall situation, they didn't want to open it up again for public bidding. And I should clarify at this point that it was not the National Park Service that was running Peirce Mill at this point. It was the Department of Public Buildings and Grounds, and they were a division of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And it was Lieutenant Colonel Clarence O. Sherrill, who canceled or declined to renew Hattie Sewall's contract. And he basically was able to connect with the Girl Scouts. He wanted to find a nonprofit to run the tea house, and he made an arrangement with the Girl Scouts. When they reopened the tea house, Mrs. Harding, the president's wife, came and she served Harding waffles. And the Girl Scouts continued to operate the tea house until sometime in the early 1930s, and we can go on to the last slide here, when the mill was restored as a working grist mill as part of the Works Progress Administration. So on the left, you see a photograph of sort of the last years of the tea house. A lot of people see that porch on the side of Peirce Mill. That was only there briefly as part of the tea house. And it was constructed sometime in the late 1920s and then torn down in the 1930s when they decided to rebuild the water wheel and turn Peirce Mill back into a working mill. And so that's all I have for now, but I look forward to continuing the discussion, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Angela. Next up, we have Rebecca Henson.
Great. Great. Just want to make sure everyone can hear me. Yes. Thanks so much for being here, and a big thanks to the race, history, and Rock Creek teams that have elevated these lesser known stories. It's really wonderful to be here talking about some of the special women's and local and American history that have happened in this very special park. Next. Thanks. So the woman I'll be talking about lived in the first half of the 20th century. Rachel Carson, who is best known for her book Silent Spring, which is the book all the way on the right of the slide, was published in 1962, and only a year and a half, it was only a year and a half before she passed away from breast cancer. Silent Spring played a major role in igniting the modern environmental movement, and Carson, as a clear-eyed writer and scientist, laid out the threats facing wildlife and ourselves if we continue down this path of short-sighted and arrogant attempts to what was deemed controlling nature. And specifically in that book, she talks about the technology of synthetic pesticides and the indiscriminate use of those pesticides, such as DDT. So yes, that book was considered to ignite, or it was the spark that ignited the modern environmental movement. It also led to a number of our laws and agencies, departments, and just practices within government, but also within our society. But Silent Spring was written in the final years of Rachel's life, the final chapter. She was born in 1907 in Springdale, Pennsylvania, and she moved to Maryland in 1929 for her graduate degree at Hopkins. From that moment on, as a very young 20-something, she was the breadwinner for her extended family, many of who lived with her. So her family moved to live with her when she was a graduate student, and then lived with her really for the rest of her life. Her career was focused on making nature, and specifically the sea, the shores and the oceans, seem accessible to the public through her writing. She came to this region to work at the Bureau of Fisheries, which became the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service while she was there. And she wrote articles and books in her personal time, winning the adoration of a nation of readers and even internationally, and winning the National Book Award in 1952 for the second book, or the second book on the left, I guess, on the screen. So the three books that we refer to as the Sea Trilogy, the first was published in 1941, and it was really from the eyes, or looking through the eyes of different sea creatures like mackerels or eels, and their journeys of migration. And it brought the reader down into the waters and into this wonderful, very dangerous for these creatures, worlds. her next book, she took on the whole subject of the sea, and was later kind of referred to as the biographer of the sea, because this book tried to capture so much of the science of the sea. And then the last one, The Edge of the Sea, is my favorite book. It started out a bit like a field guide to the shores, the Atlantic shores, but she makes it all come alive. It's a great book to bring with you to the beach or to the shore. She weaves in the ecology, the ecosystems of each of the creatures that she talks about, and really brings them to life. And so it was the sea around us that allowed her to become a full-time writer and eventually leave her federal job, and while still supporting her extended family. Next. Thanks. So Rachel Carson, as I said, moved to the DC area after first attending graduate school in Baltimore, and then she did try to work from there. She wrote for the Baltimore Sun. She covered, her beat was the Chesapeake Bay, so the creatures and the features of the bay. She also taught biology courses at various colleges, and then that is where she was living when she got her job with fisheries. But she, in 1937, moved to Silver Spring, Maryland, for an easier commute and for the good schools for her nieces. She was like thousands of others who came to this region in the 30s and 40s. They were bright and motivated individuals from around the country, and they were eagerly accepting stable jobs with the federal government. This influx of workers led to a bit of a renaissance for the local Audubon Society. So our local society that I'm referring to is now called Nature Forward, but for the purposes of this history, I'll call it Audubon, or ANS, Audubon Naturalist Society. So these new workers were new to this area. They joined because of their interest in birds, but the organization itself became a major part of their social lives, and discussions among the members would influence them in their work lives as well. They would share updates and bounce important ideas off of one another and discuss things as early as the mid-40s about pesticides. And so this really was her community, and this included, some notable figures like Roger Tory Peterson, Chan Robbins, Lewis Hawley, who wrote the great book Spring in Washington, Shirley Briggs, and many more. And members like Rachel joined for these bird trips and walks, bird counts, but these same members ended up expanding the purview of ANS. It went from focusing on birding to a wider view, looking into the conservation of the habitats that supported those very birds. Rachel, after she passed away, she had been on the board of ANS for years, and she was in the write-up in their journal. They said that she steered us toward larger horizons, and that no other member had such an impact on their organization and how they work in this region. ANS did not have a home base or headquarters for the first 70 years that it was in existence. So its home base was where it met. It was in Rock Creek Park for bird walks and bird counts, the Christmas bird count. And that was important because they were able to do research then as well, using the park to notice and observe that, for example, the breeding birds had dropped by a third since they started recording it in the 40s by 1970, and that the long distance migratory birds were declining by 90%. So inevitably, Rock Creek Park became a place where ANS wanted to defend. And that's a picture of Rachel in Glover Archibald Park, which is part of Rock Creek Park. Next. So these members were very influential in getting the word out about threats to the park, which they saw as critical, vital lungs, really, to the city. And many of them, like Shirley Briggs and others, and Rachel, were writers and artists, and they were able to communicate simply through graphics like what's on the screen, this potential dam and reservoir on the left, and then on the right, what was the habitat and watershed effects of a freeway that would have run through Rock Creek Park. Next, thanks. So Rachel was part of a lot of that. There was a speech that she made in 1954. At the same time, that her career was focused on the sea, she became increasingly concerned about land issues. She talks about both the wonders of nature and then the threats to the natural world in this speech. And some of the language that she uses here gets folded into an article that she writes in 1956 on wonder and the importance of nurturing wonder. That magazine turns into a book that was posthumously published called The Sense of Wonder. And I'm just going to read a little bit what's on the screen very quickly. And she's talking about the man-made destruction of places of wonder. She says, "We see it in distressing form in the nation's capital, where I live. There in the heart of the city, we have a small but beautiful woodland area, Rock Creek Park. It's a place where one can go to get away from the noise of traffic, of man-made confusions, for a little interval of refreshing and restoring quiet, where one can hear the soft highway through the heart. One can hear the soft, it should say water, through the heart of the narrow woodland valley. I'm so sorry. I think something on my screen just got funny. Oh, the water sounds of a stream on its way to the river and sea, where the wind flows through the trees and a veery sings in the green twilight. Now they propose to run a 6-lane arterial highway through the heart of that narrow woodland valley, destroying forever its true and immeasurable value to the city and to the nation." And so it was partially thanks to Rachel and her colleagues that this major highway did not get built and did not destroy part of our park. Next. So it was not only that Carson helped Rock Creek Park, but Rock Creek Park helped her. It gave her her first experience of what would become her favorite bird, the veery. She'd never seen or heard it before, but in the late 40s, an Audubon member, Lewis Hawley, took her to see some nesting veeries in the park. This bird, the bird's song, and this memory of it went on to motivate her and restore her at times, comfort her, and it helped to inspire her final book, Silent Spring. Next. And finally, she did finish Silent Spring. And this quote here, she immediately thinks back to the birds and especially the thrushes like the veery that she felt so protective of, that she felt that she wanted to be a caretaker of. So Carson, as she says here, put this effort, her book and her philosophy out into the world to live and to thrive. And that is the legacy that we all inherit today. And that legacy lives on in Rock Creek Park. It's something that she and her colleagues literally helped shape by preventing its partial destruction and by celebrating its wonders. Thanks.
Thank you, Rebecca. Up next, we have Miss Georgia Ellard.
Thanks to the Conservatory and also the National Park Service for continuing these very educational programs on the race history in Rock Creek Park. My role is to tell you about my position as a woman in the National Park Service. The National Park Service did employ many women in other parks, but the National Capital Region of the National Park Service never had a superintendent in their managerial scheme. I joined the Park Service in 1977, and I was a clerk typist at Fort DuPont Park. As a responsibility there, I had complete responsibility for the office. And then I was promoted and had responsibilities in other fields of the National Capital Parks, National Park Service, in such fields as administration, maintenance, visitor programs, visitors services, concessions, historical, cultural, and natural resources. I was the first park manager superintendent of the National Visitor Center, which was located in Union Station. The Union Station served as the initial visiting site for people coming from overseas as well as from the national area. And it served many, many people to show them the facilities that were available for them to visit throughout the city. We had many also programs that were provided there for them, many informational services in it. And we also provided programs for the local community.
Miss Ellard, I don't want to interrupt you, but we'd love to see your beautiful face if you're able to switch your camera angle.
I will try very hard.
Okay. If it doesn't work, that's okay. We just want to ask.
Well, Elena, you know, I'm not very computer literate and I'm trying difficult. It says that the video is on.
I think it just is not facing you if there's like a flip button. But if not, I don't want to take up too much of your time, so you can keep going.
Okay. I'm sorry about that. I'll make one more try to see if I can. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Okay.
I don't want to take up any more of your time. Thank you.
Okay. I would like to also say that the Visitor Center also served as one of the inaugural balls for Jimmy and Rosalind Carter. But as you may know, the Visitor Center, which was Union Station, had many structural problems and it was closed. When it was closed, then I was assigned to Rock Creek Park as the assistant superintendent. And I served in that capacity for 2 years. Excuse me, Rock Creek Park was also not just the park proper, it managed many other areas in addition to the 1,700 acres, which include the Rock Creek Park and Potomac Parkway, the Rock Creek Nature Center, Peirce Mill, the Art Barn, Dumbarton Oaks, Montrose Park, Meridian Hill Park, and forts throughout the city, and the old stone house in Georgetown. And we were responsible for all of those properties. The budget for that Rock Creek Park was $2.5 million for the annual budget. And I had supervision of 80 full-time employees and approximately 90 temporary employees during the summer months. I also wanted to say that during my tenure at Rock Creek Park, the Peirce Mill was inoperable. The wheel had been broken. And so we received support and assistance from the superintendent of the C&O Canal in helping us make the repair to the Peirce Mill wheel. And at that time we employed a miller and we were able to restore it and have an opening for the young people in the city. The schools were able to come in and also local neighbors came, and we had a grand opening for Peirce Mill when we finally got the wheel restored. Women, although women didn't serve in the capacity of superintendent. In fact, I was the first female superintendent in the National Capital Region. There were female superintendents in the other regions of the National Park Service, but none in the National Capital Region, which is located in Washington, D.C. But today there are women who serve in this capacity of superintendents at George Washington Memorial Parkway, National Capital Parks East, and Harper's Ferry. The men are still the dominant managers, but at least there have been many roads open for women that were not open previously. They were usually relegated to the lower grades and to clerical positions. I don't think that I have any more information about the management of Rock Creek Park, except that we were responsible for maintaining the stream. We were also responsible for all of the maintenance activities and the interpretive activities. Also, in addition to the restoration of Peirce Mill, the Nature Center was also restored and made whole while I was superintendent of Rock Creek Park. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to respond to them.
Thank you, Ms. Ellard. Next up, we're going to take some time to ask our panelists some questions. And I have a few already ready to ask, but if folks want to ask any in the chat, we'll take those in a few minutes. So just think about your questions. And I have about 3 or 4 for each panelist right now. And yeah, plop yours in the chat and we'll get to them after I go through the ones I have.
Autumn, actually, we are just going to do some of the modern impacts with Peirce Mill and with the Springsong Museum, and then we'll get into questions. So, like Autumn said, please put your questions in the chat, and we will get to that portion soon. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. And I just wanted to say what an honor it is to be on a panel with Miss Ellard. And from the Friends of Peirce Mill and from all of us at Peirce Mill, I can't tell you how wonderful it is to hear about the work that she did in Rock Creek Park, but especially at the mill. And the reason that I chose to use this illustration for this slide is because this drawing was made by Ted Hazen, who was our miller starting in the 1980s, and he was the miller hired when Miss Ellard was Rock Creek Park superintendent. And he really did transform the mill in so many ways. He brought milling experience, and it was also a wonderful artist and created this beautiful drawing. So it's always wonderful to hear about the work that Miss Ellard did. Unfortunately, there have been many years passed since Ted Hazen ran the mill back in the 1980s and early 90s. And the machinery did eventually break again in the late 1990s, because that's what tends to happen with grist mills. And the Friends of Peirce Mill were established with the purpose of restoring the mill. If you're interested in learning more about the Friends of Peirce Mill and our programming, I put a QR code in there that gives you a link to join our mailing list, and we'll send you an email every once in a while telling you about some programs we have coming up at the mill, including, if I can have the next slide, please. An event that we're really excited about at the end of this month. It's going to be a Peirce Mill Tea House celebration. This is something we've wanted to do for a long time, and we are going to be doing it this spring. We're going to be decorating the tea house, or the mill, to be the tea house again, at least our best guess what the tea house look like. We'll have some light refreshments and some recorded period music. Folks are encouraged to wear a period appropriate dress, so early 20th century dress. And we'll have some educational activities for young people, and we'll also be showing our short film about Hattie Sewall that we created a few years ago. We'll be showing that up in the barn. So it should be a really lovely event. I'm going to put some information in the chat that we can share later about this event, and also about a link to our webpage about Hattie Sewall. Thank you so much.
Great. I'll just quickly say that, the modern day impact, we talked a little bit about at the end of my comments then, But it's also, the way I think that we can best appreciate Carson's legacy in this area is pretty simple, and it's doing what she asks us to do, which is notice and observe, keep that wonder in us, and be open to marveling at the leaf that's falling or the flower that's, trying to make its way out of the soil. And then also to question and, to have caution. But of course, that is not enough. We at Springsong Museum don't think that we should be kind of finished with her lesson or that her legacy is in the past. We believe that it is the best time right now to focus on some of these ideas of wonder and caring for our communities, caring for the land and the water, the air where we live, for the places that give us that sense of connection and belonging, and meaning. So we are we're a community effort that started 4 years ago. We're a 501c3 that will be creating a museum, a physical place, in a vacant building that's been vacant for 6 decades. It's an old industrial building in Silver Spring, Maryland. That's right before you get to Trader Joe's. And it will tell Carson's story. There is no public museum that speaks her legacy. So we will be that, but we'll also be a community museum. We will reflect the stories of our community, the interconnections, as Carson would see it, of the different communities that have lived here for hundreds, thousands of years, and really, celebrate, lean into the world that we're living in, the region, the mica that gives Silver Spring its name is scattered all over the property there. So we will be partnering with Montgomery Parks to lease the property. And there's a QR code here on the screen where you can learn more about our project, give us feedback. And we have started a series of seasonal hikes with a naturalist, and we'll have much more in the future to invite you to.
All right, thank you. I'm going to start with some questions we have. Angela, I'm going to start with you if that's okay. Hattie Sewall was a remarkable figure in Peirce Mill's history, running the Mills Tea House in the early 1900s as a Black woman entrepreneur. How do you think her story reflects the broader role of women in shaping the history around Rock Creek Park?
Yes, well, thank you very much for that question. And I think that, it's important to remember that, there weren't that many opportunities for women, like I said, in the early 20th century. And, parks also, I think, and you can see it in the faces of those young women, offered women a place of some freedom. Those pictures of those young women cavorting in Rock Creek Park, they're playing golf, they're playing tennis, they're in front of Peirce Mill Tea House. And so I wrote I'll put it in the chat, I wrote a short blog post about that series of photographs last year. And I think it really kind of speaks to sort of the park's role in providing a place where women could, express themselves and enjoy themselves. So.
Thank you. Rebecca. Rachel Carson's work transformed the way we think about environmental conservation. How do you think her legacy influenced your approach to environmental education and storytelling at Springsong Museum?
That's a great question. It's and so she was a very modest person. She didn't want to be the center of attention. She didn't want the spotlight on her. She wanted it on her work and her philosophy. And so it's, tricky creating a museum about more or less about somebody who didn't like the spotlight. And so it's a great opportunity for us then to do as we know she would have wished, to focus on her message. And a huge part of that message was environmental education. There was the side of it that is intergenerational nature education. She really believed that awe and wonder and all the good things of being connected to the natural world comes best when just one adult nurtures that interest in children. She believed that children naturally had that interest in the natural world, but just one adult, asking them, oh, did you hear that sound? Did you hear that bird? Or I wonder what that was. But you didn't have to be an expert. You didn't have to know anything about science, but just really appreciating that sense of wonder that children already had. On the other side of environmental education, she had such faith that we all can and deserve to know the facts, to know science, even in the most basic ways, that it's that we have a personal responsibility to learn about the world around us and how it works. And she had a lot of faith that if she was putting out this information in clear ways, that we would take that information and make the best decisions for ourselves and society. But to your real question, or to your question, it's at Springsong, we'll be leaning more into the wonder, to that sparking of interest, and that, trying to develop that lifelong love of the natural world, which she saw as a very emotional experience. It's okay to appeal to emotion, she said. So.
Thank you. Miss Ellard, the next question is for you. You broke many barriers in your career with the National Park Service. What were some of the biggest challenges you faced as a Black woman during your tenure with the NPS, and how did you overcome them?
Well, when I attended meetings, many of the participants in the meetings did not expect to see a woman as superintendent, neither did they expect to see a Black woman. So my only response was just act natural, to do my presentation and to go ahead and attend the meeting just as the other participants participated in the meeting. I did the same thing.
Thank you. Angela, women have historically played key roles in managing and preserving public spaces, often in ways that go unrecognized. How do you work to uncover and share the stories of women like Hattie Sewall at Peirce Mill?
Yes, so we did a lot of work, as I mentioned, on the Hattie Sewall story, and that's a project that we started back in Friends of Peirce Mill started in 2020 and 2021 on the 100th anniversary of when Hattie Sewall managed the tea house. We've done some other work though to learn more about some of the other women associated with the mill, and I wanted to mention, because of your question, a woman named Ruth Butler, who was a woman who was a preservationist. And she was part of the Historic American Building Survey in the 1930s. It was associated with the restoration of the mill in the 1930s. And there were a lot of women like her who were called secretaries or assistants, but actually wrote the reports and did a lot of the work. And so I'll put that link in the chat, because a lot of the information we have about the mill in the 19th century came from Ruth Butler's report that she did in the 1930s, because in the 1930s, there were still people alive who remembered the mill in the 19th century. So she's another woman, and I'll put that information in the chat.
Rebecca, I think you may have covered a little bit of this in your last answer, but I'm going to go ahead and ask this. Carson's writings emphasize the importance of fostering a sense of wonder about the natural world. How do you incorporate that philosophy into your work with children and families?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. The first time I read something that Rachel wrote, which was part of the sense of wonder, she said, it's not so important to know as to feel. And it kind of, it didn't make much sense to me, because we are in this time of where facts should matter and you know, but that's not what she was talking about. She was talking about from experience what really connects with people, what gets them to care about the environment. And she was also really speaking, there was a line before that line that I just said, where she said for the parent who or adult who thinks he doesn't know much about the natural world, it is not so important to know as to feel. And so she's really getting at this idea that she's trying to make it accessible, that anybody can lean into this sense of wonder and share that and nurture it in others. At the museum, we're also going to have extensive native gardens around what's now a lot of turf grass, and it's around this huge parking lot. And through that, we'll be interpreting those gardens through the senses and using the 5 senses that Rachel believes is so important to creating that emotional response to nature.
Thank you. Miss Ellard, during your time as superintendent, what accomplishments are you most proud of in Rock Creek Park? And you are on mute if you are speaking to us.
The accomplishments that I was most proud of at Rock Creek Park was the fact that I was able to restore the Peirce Mill to its original scene. We did not have the history of the Peirce Mill as a tea house. And so our interpretation there was strictly the mill as a grist mill. And it was not open when I became superintendent. So I made it one of my projects to make sure that the mill became an operative mill and that the children of the city, as well as those visiting the National Capital Region and the National Park Service, would be able to experience a grist mill, which was not something that was available during those days.
Thank you. Angela, what challenges do you face in bringing attention to the contributions of women in the history of places like Peirce Mill? And how can other historical sites do a better job of making these narratives more visible?
Well, I think sometimes we think that women's narratives or narratives, stories that aren't told, that they're harder to research. And that may be true to some extent, but I think that especially with some of the new research tools available online, the ability to search documents, the one thing I learned about during the Hattie Sewall project, and just to give some context, we started the Hattie Sewall project in 1920. I keep saying that in 2020. I'm not that old, to learn more about Hattie Sewall. But of course, it was in the middle of a pandemic and the National Archives were closed. And so we weren't able to access them right away, but we did finally get into the National Archives and we found all of Hattie Sewall's letters. So the thing that I learned was that maybe the challenge isn't so much that the information isn't there, it's that we're not always asking the questions and looking, because when we went to look, there were all of her letters were in the files, all of her receipts, the correspondence from the park managers, all in the files. So I think we just need to start asking more questions and researching more. So thank you.
Thanks for that response. I'm actually a librarian as well.
I hope my answer was accurate then, Autumn. I forgot you were a librarian.
But people might think everything's always online, but not everything's been digitized yet. So sometimes you do have to go in person. So thanks for giving us some insight. Rebecca, Rachel Carson faced significant pushback as a woman challenging powerful industries. From your perspective, what lessons can we take from her resilience when advocating for environmental policies today?
Yes. So, most of her career writing about the sea, she didn't have any pushback. She wasn't attacked for being a woman. There were, she notes that there were times when readers would write to her and say, "Are you sure you're a woman?" Like, this is like they were just incredulous that a woman wrote about this huge, dense topic of the sea. But then with Silent Spring, it really so much so much pushback from a small a percentage of people who read it, but of course that was generally fueled by the industries that serve to lose something from what she was saying in her book. So chemical industries in particular went after Rachel in newspapers, writing their own booklets and pamphlets and trying to get the word out that this was a hysterical woman, a spinster. Why in the world would somebody care about the next generation if she didn't have any biological children? And this was a woman who took care of, her family for her whole life. She adopted a grandnephew. But goodness, she didn't have her own, biological children. So why would she care? And sometimes it veered from, those questions about her kind of womanhood, to then the conclusion of, oh, well, she must be a communist or working for the bad side, and just really kind of unbelievable to read these days. But through all of it, she persisted and persevered and endured quite a lot. But she knew that she was victorious after coming, both writing the book, having the opportunity to defend it before Congress, being part of President Kennedy's science committee, and having them more or less like validate the work that she had included. So she really just stuck to her mission. And I know that, it must have been unreal to have so much noise around her, but from a tiny, I think 4 or 5 years old, we see, she's writing about nature, writing about caring for others and about her. So this is something that goes, it's a lifelong part of who she was. And it is something that I think we can all remember and just try to emulate when possible. And of course, it might have started much earlier. For sure, starting in 1960, she'd been diagnosed with breast cancer. So it wasn't just these external attacks, it was internal attacks. And it made it very, very hard for her to even finish this book. But she finished writing in bed, and she then went on to do those public, defenses of the work. And she went on national television wearing a wig and kind of suffering under the bright lights of the lights, next to the cameras. And so it wasn't only the external forces that she was somehow defying. And it's wonderful that she was able to finish the book and see that it had at least an impact even at that time when she passed away in 1964.
Thank you for that answer. I think Miss Ellard is back, even though she's not highlighted on the screen. I think I saw her in the participants. So I do have another question. Rock Creek Park has been a space where history, nature, and community intersect. Miss Ellard, how did you navigate these different aspects in your leadership role?
I'm sorry, would you repeat the question?
Nature and community intersect. How did you navigate these different aspects in your leadership role?
You still cut off, but I think that you asked me how did I intersect the private role as well as the natural role of Rock Creek Park?
The history, the nature, and the community roles, yes.
The community was very involved in all aspects of the management of Rock Creek Park. And we used to meet at the community meetings. We were very active with the advisory neighborhood commissioners. We met with other groups that were active in the park area, and we presented programs for them, invited them to programs, and we participated in their programs. So therefore, there was an interaction between the park service personnel and myself and the neighborhood commissioners and the neighborhood itself.
Thank you. I have one more question for each panelist, then we'll look for the folks in the chat's questions. Angela, how do you honor Hattie Sewall's entrepreneurial and community building spirit through current programming at Peirce Mill?
So the Tea House event that we're doing in March is going to be fun. You know, we're encouraging folks to dress up or have music, but we're also creating some educational activities around the Peirce Mill Tea House. We've connected with the Girl Scouts and hope that this will be an event that will bring young people to the mill. And we're creating some fun activities that also teach a little bit about entrepreneurship and about opportunities for women in the past and how those lessons can kind of inspire us in the future. One of the things I'll tell you that we're going to feature that I think will be kind of fun is the challenge of coming up with a menu for the tea house. We have some of the old tea house menus. Some of them are foods that we might not want to eat today. There's some very interesting salads that all seem to contain mayonnaise. But one of the challenges we'll have for the young people who come to the tea house event is to design their own tea house menu and maybe create a salad that would have a fancy name that they think people might like. So we're having some fun with it, but also really seriously trying to get people interested in the idea of women in entrepreneurship and what that meant in the past and what it could mean in the future. So.
Thanks, Angela. I might have to come up with a few recipe names to pass along. Rebecca, how can we carry Rachel Carson's mission forward in local conservation efforts like those in Rock Creek Park?
Yeah, very good question. I think, you know, not just doing the work, like pulling the porcelain berry out, but, you know, slowing ourselves down when we're doing it and noticing and appreciating. And really, I want to bring back the word marvel. I feel like we don't use it enough, but marveling in what we see, even if it is the porcelain berry that, you know, is frustrating us. But, you know, is there a wren hiding behind the porcelain berry? And I wonder, you know, when just are they going to eat it, or just all these different questions that really pick up on interconnection and our connection, the connection between all life that Carson was so focused on, the good and the bad of that, but really noticing those good connections, and especially with our feathered friends, and even with the invasive vines, just trying to understand and you know, constantly wonder. But the work itself obviously is so important as well. And Carson, you know, as she stood up to defend Rock Creek Park and that this freeway wouldn't be put down the middle of it, clearly she cared about real action like that as well. But it was always through this lens of this wonder-filled world.
Thank you. Miss Ellard, as someone who's paved the way for future generations, do you have any advice for young people, especially women or people of color, who want to pursue careers in the National Park Service?
I think that, first of all, they should have a real interest in the natural areas, and they should take courses and probably participate as youngsters in the activities that are conducted by the natural areas, because the Park Service does manage mainly natural areas, although there are monuments and memorials, but the emphasis is primarily on the outdoors. And so in order for women to achieve and be promoted in those kinds of assignments, they have to show an early interest, and they should also participate as often as they can in activities that will groom them for participation in a natural area.
Thank you for your insight. I think we're ready now for questions that have come in via the chat. Rock Creek Conservancy going to read those, or do you want me to?
Yes, sorry about that. I was having trouble unmuting. But our first question in the chat is from Cynthia, and I believe this is directed to six-lane highway was proposed through Rock Creek, but that runs through the park, or when was the roadway that runs through the park developed and why? Parts of the roadway are closed at times. Any chance the roadway will be permanently closed?
I do not know when the final kind of nail in the coffin.
You're muted.
Oh,
I think there have always been efforts to widen the park because that was a direct route from Washington to Maryland, and the commuters certainly wanted to go the shortest route. So there have been many organizations and people who have promoted the idea that the park should be widened and it should be open. The park is also closed during the weekend so that there can be wider recreational usage. And that's why the park is closed on the weekends and holidays.
I'm actually going to.
I'm not sure if.
I'm going to put a
Autumn.
link into the chat for folks that I have the park's history up on my computer. So here's administrative history of the parkway for folks. And and currently Beach Drive, I think Miss Ellard was kind of referring to that, is actually parts of it are closed year round now. But go ahead, Elaine.
Yes, thank you, Autumn. Our next question, I believe this was also for Rebecca. Do veeries still live in the park?
I don't know. I've heard wood thrush there. I would have to defer to folks who are there a little bit more than I am these days, but I hear their cousins, the wood thrush. And one, somewhat related thing was that we found some really neat articles that Carson worked on with her friend Shirley Briggs with Audubon, where they're talking about what an incredible place to see the woodcock Rock Creek Park is. And the portion of Rock Creek Park, I mean, it's like an oasis for woodcock dances. And the place that they're talking about is in the Rock Creek Park portion, the Maryland portion, and it's right where the Beltway went through just years later. But it would have been pretty neat to see woodcock along Beach Drive there in Maryland, which is essentially where this was.
I'm dropping a link to our birds page, and it also has a species list. I don't have a chance to search it, but other folks can.
Elena, do we have any more questions in the chat?
Oh, I got muted. This next question is from Kathy, and it's for Miss Ellard, and we are wondering what the highlight of your career was, Miss Ellard.
I did mention that one of the highlights was certainly the opening of Peirce Mill, but there were many things that were done when we were able to also contain the invasive plants. We had a program designed so that we could manage the plants, and we worked with our resource management people to come up with a natural way that we could contain the plants that were suffering, not the natural vegetation. And so that was one of the things that was very important to me. And also stream management was an important aspect. We had a lot of problems with debris and other issues with the stream, and we were able to manage and cut and correct those issues. So those are some of the highlights of the issues that I had to contact and that I'm proud that we were able to manage.
Thank you. And this question, I don't believe it's specifically directed to anyone, so I will defer to Autumn. But Kayla is wondering what is the most effective way to reach the younger generation of women and girls with the importance of Rock Creek Park and how important it is to protect it and its wildlife. Additionally, is there a best way to encourage them to pursue a career that helps the environment?
I think Miss Ellard did a great job of answering that in one of the last questions I asked her. But you know, I would say that you know, visiting parks, getting interested in STEM programming. At the park that I worked at before I came to Rock Creek Park, we had a lot of programming for youth in the local schools, and it encouraged a lot of them to be part of what's called the Youth Conservation Corps, and those are in several parks and national forests. And I think you all at Rock Creek Conservancy has a have a corps that young people can join as well. So I think those are great starts. And any of the other panelists that want to chime in with their thoughts on that question.
Well, I'll just chime in because my background is in education. It's sort of what my passion, as you can probably tell from my talking about the TS event. And we do know that one of the things that really impacts young people for their future involvement in just about anything, and whether you're talking about museums or cultural events or going to a national park, it's doing it when they're young with their families, especially. And so getting people out into the park, both with school programs, but also really doing family programs, encouraging families to use the park, that pays off huge dividends 10, 20 years down from the road, because those same children are going to want to protect nature because they had that experience as a child. So,
and starting with the Rock Creek Nature Center, that's a good place to start young people's interest in the park, and that would certainly encourage young people to begin to look to the Park Service for opportunities for employment.
Absolutely.
I'll just add, you know, from a museum standpoint, we take seriously the fact that Rachel was a science writer, but that it was her, what they called poetic prose, that really endeared people to her writing and got people to read what she was writing, the science that she was writing about. So any opportunity to elevate the arts and you know, visual art, music, other things, other expressions of our love for the natural world that might be expressed in different ways for different people. I often like to talk about the painter Alma Thomas, who was, you know, a DC resident and who began painting in the way that we most remember her for, because of, you know, looking through a window in her DC house and the way that the light was shining with a pine tree that was right through the window. And most of her work was inspired by nature. And I think when we make those connections obvious for any of us, you know, it just adds to the richness of kind of nature and science experiences.
I also wanted to add that the Park Service also manages many historical areas, and so that an individual doesn't have to be only concerned with the natural aspect of it. There are historical areas that they can join that will be of interest to them.
I'm actually able to see the chat pretty well now. I think there's one more question that's for Miss Ellard. I'll read it if Elena doesn't mind. Miss Ellard, what was the biggest, and this is from someone that doesn't put their name, but I think it's their phone from work. What was the biggest natural resources threat during your management time, and how did you lead your staff on that management?
I think the biggest management threat were the invasive plants. They were taking over all of the natural areas. And so we were trying our best to find out a way that we could control those without creating a problem for the natural resources. And so I think that's an ongoing problem in the park. I think they're still concerned with controlling those things that would smother the natural resources of the park.
Highlight the volunteer events monthly in our events newsletter, that most of them are about invasive plant management. So I think you're correct. I don't think we have any other questions.
And to tell Angela that the author of the books that she was talking about was raised in Springdale, Pennsylvania, and that's only about 15 miles from where I grew up and went to school.
Great to know. Yeah.
Autumn, you're
You know
muted.
what?
Oh, or just breaking up maybe.
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
Or I was just going to ask Megan or Elena if there were any other questions that they had from Rock Creek Conservancy, or if they had any thoughts. I know I'm supposed to wrap up, but I don't want to do it early.
Thank you. No, thank you everyone for wonderful program this evening. And Autumn, thank you for moderating a wonderful discussion. If we don't have questions, I think we can wrap up, but to your point, I'll pass it to Wynn and Elena and our team to see if any questions came up from our discussion tonight.
I was wondering, I just didn't see who had mentioned that about Springdale, Pennsylvania.
That was me.
Oh, that was you. Oh,
Yeah.
gosh. Wonderful, Miss Ellard. Yes, it's been a funny thing since starting this museum project for 4 years now. So many people that I've met are from Western Pennsylvania, and had never met Rachel Carson, but she, of course, was also from there. And I think the natural beauty out there, but then also the industrialization, the power plants, she lived near a glue plant. Her house was in between two factories. So she witnessed the destruction firsthand, but then also just, it's so beautiful out there. So that's great to know.
I just want to say that I'm so sorry I'm so late getting on, but the wind blew me off. So I missed just about all of the program. I finally got on, just a few minutes ago, but I'm sure it was a great presentation. I think I've seen Miss Ellard somewhere here in our area long time ago, but I'm sure it was a great program.
Thanks, Ms. Tyson. And we started off the evening saying that the program will be available on our website. So if you didn't catch the whole thing, we'll send it out afterwards tomorrow, along with some resources that were shared in the chat.
Okay.
But thank you for joining us. It's great to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all so much. It's good to see Pat here. Also good to see you here, Lucille, and so many friends. It's just wonderful to see so many people coming. Thank you. And I hope some of you can come to the Tea House event.
That'd be great. Autumn, do you have anything you'd like to say? Otherwise, I can say a few parting words.
Well, I had something written as a parting, but
Go
either
ahead.
way.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to say on behalf of Rock Creek Park, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this evening for this discussion about women's history and Rock Creek. We certainly appreciate Rock Creek Conservancy for hosting this free virtual event for everyone. And of course, I want to thank the panelists for sharing their insight, knowledge, and experiences with us tonight.
Well, thank you all. And it is just an absolute pleasure to share some space with Ms. Ellard and also with you, Rebecca, and with all of you. Thank you so much.
Thanks to the Conservancy and National Park Service. I enjoyed participating in the programs, and I congratulate the Conservancy on continuing to help maintain all aspects of Rock Creek Park and the other areas that Rock Creek Park is assigned to maintain.
Thank you so much, Miss Ellard.
And just a quick thanks for me to all the civil servants on the call. Rachel Carson was a civil servant, and it's what shaped her career and gave her the stability for her family that she needed. So I appreciate seeing so many of you here.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Thank you to our panelists and to Autumn for moderating, and thank you all for attending. If you enjoyed tonight's program, please do check out our webpage, and you'll be able to access all the recordings from our past events, just like Angela had mentioned, and Ms. Ellard, they have been featured in some of our past race history and Rock Creek programs, and Rebecca. So you can see some of our other topics from the past. And our next Race History and Rock Creek program will focus on the 75th anniversary of Carter Barron Amphitheater. So we hope to see you there on May 7th for that virtual program. But thank you all and have a great rest of your evening. I'll stop the recording.